We recently had a Nintendo Direct that showcased a lot of games coming to the Switch 2, the biggest announcement being the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time remake. I'm pretty excited for that game, but within this Direct, Pokopia DLC was announced, and where this DLC is taking place is pretty interesting, so let's talk about it. Pokemon Pokopia's DLC will be broken up into three parts. Part 1 is called the Bubbly Basin. So let's take a look at the trailer that was played for this during the Direct. Exclusively to Nintendo Switch 2 systems. So this is the Bubbly Basin DLC, and here we have our character diving underwater. This DLC is all underwater, and you can see here the entire landscape just being very vast. Here you see the entire ecosystem, all the materials, everything that you can do and build. It's very, very vast. Here we have our character again with this little bubble helmet that kind of is on our character's head. And here you can see our character and some new Pokemon, Psyduck, Azumarill, Piplup, Psy-Ai, shout out to Psyduck. And here's more footage of our character with these Pokemon. Peep the mouse hold here, which is pretty interesting. It's very cool. Our character with the Zoro haircut. And here we have, more footage. Here, you're seeing some, new abilities being used. Peep the Squirtle tail and Squirtle shell. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Oh, Popplio is here. Popplio is in this DLC. It looks really cool. Mudkip too. Mudkip is so awesome. Pokemon look cool. Corphish, awesome. All the best water types are here. You already know it's hype. Water typing is the best typing. There's no debate. So yeah, Pokopia Expansion Pass DLC available on the Nintendo eShop. And this is the Bubbly Basin Part 1, which will be available August 2026, and it's actually going to be free for everyone, which is super cool. And then Part 2 is going to be available late 2026. I can imagine that this is going to be like a holiday-themed DLC package, and then Part 3 is going to come out 2027, which is interesting because, we're getting Winds and Waves in 2027. So that's super cool. So Pokopia Expansion Pass and DLC is here. Shout out to Game Freak. Shout out to Koei Tecmo. Shout out to Dragon Quest. So after watching that trailer, it's pretty cool to see Pokopia's world expand. Pokemon Pokopia has been getting a lot of love. It's been a huge success within the community and within gaming in general. It's people are saying it's a Game of the Year candidate. So it's cool to see it getting DLC and expanding on its content. So a couple of things here, it's this first DLC part, Bubble Basin, is completely underwater, and us being able to dive and interact with the underwater environment draws a lot of comparisons to the Winds and Waves trailer. Towards the end of that trailer, how we dived underwater and saw a bunch of Pokemon. So this is kind of related to that. A lot of fans have speculated that this DLC could maybe be tied to Winds and Waves somehow. Is it something that Pokemon is kind of just plotting or something? People are even going further and saying the next DLC is gonna be in the skies. It'll be we'll be building in the skies. So yeah, super cool. To me, also looking at the trailer and also looking at this website here, we see that there are new outfits for the Ditto trainer. And here you can see that the trainer has the Brendan costume from Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. So that's really cool to see. A lot of people are speculating that because of this, this DLC is taking place somewhere in the Hoenn region, which is not too far of a stretch because the Hoenn region is a lot of water. It's mainly composed of water. Shout out to IGN. But that's not too much of a stretch to say. To me, I think this DLC is still in the Kanto region, specifically Vermilion City, because in the Direct, they played Vermilion City's theme music. That's kind of a giveaway that this is, based in Vermilion City. And I think also this DLC will go further and will touch like Fuchsia City potentially, because Fuchsia City is also by the coast, and so I wouldn't be surprised if Fuchsia City gets some recognition here. But yeah, seeing these screenshots like Ditto and Brendan's outfit, that's really cool. This here again, you see the entire ecosystem, and it's just sort of the design elements and design materials that people use to build this sort of landscape. So it's really cool to see this underwater world within Pokopia. Poplio's here. I love Poplio. I feel like Poplio has gotten a lot of hate. It's overhated in my opinion. I don't know why. Poplio is super cool. And I love that here you see there is some new Poplio 2D art, which is super cool. I love how Poplio is basically being like the mascot for this DLC. You love to see it. And yeah, like Poplio looks really cool, really great in this game. We saw Mudkip, Corefish, like all the dope water types are here. So that's really exciting. Scrolling down here, we see some more just, DLC, bonuses. If you do the early purchase, I believe, you can get this like Ditto, like wallpaper. And then here you get some like materials for crafting as well. So really cool. And then, again, this DLC is essentially a 3-part DLC, and so part 2 is coming out late 2026. Again, I think this is gonna be like a holiday themed DLC. Like definitely like around the holiday times. Like I can definitely see like this DLC being like somewhere like snowy and icy. Getting a lot of ice types, this and that. Like I definitely see that being the theme for this. And then the third DLC coming out in 2027. This is interesting again because, we're expected to get Winds and Waves in 2027. We don't know when in 2027, but sometime. And so it would be really cool to see where Pokopia falls in this year. Something I thought of, which I don't think is going to happen, but let's say if we get Winds and Waves like sometime like early or mid 2027, and then we have it for a while, and then this part 3 Pokopia DLC comes afterwards, and it's like a Winds and Waves themed DLC where we basically get like some area or region or part of the game where it's all like Gen 10, and we get like the Gen 10 starters, Pombon, Gekwa, Brout, all in the game. Like that'd be super cool. Like I don't think it's gonna happen, but I think that'd be super cool, and like it'd be a cool tie-in to Gen 10 and Pokopia. So yeah, so that is the breakdown essentially of the Bubbly Basin DLC. Now, something that was interesting is that towards the end of the trailer, there was a sort of tease of Manaphy at the end right here. And so Manaphy was teased at the end of the trailer, and a lot of people are assuming that the Bubbly Basin DLC will have something to do with Manaphy, which is most likely the truth. I think that's super dope. To me, Manaphy is a very it's pretty forgotten. It's a very forgotten mythical during its time, like back in like mid 2000s, like before Gen 4 was revealed. Like Manaphy was like one of the first Pokemon to be introduced to us from Generation 4. Got its own movie, this and that, and ever since then it's kind of been forgotten. I pulled up Manaphy's Pokedex here on Pokemon database, and we see Manaphy is here. I kind of wanted to just like go through its Pokedex entries and again see if there's like any sort of hint of foreshadowing that can be implemented into Pokopia. But it's Diamond and Pearl entry. Diamond entry, born on a cold seafloor, it will swim great distances to return to its birthplace. So where is that birthplace? You I question that. Water makes up 80% of its body. This Pokemon is easily affected by its environment. So again, very interesting. It is born with a wondrous power that lets it bond with any kind of Pokemon. Born on a cold seafloor, it will swim great distances to return to its birthplace. So the Pokedex constantly hints at this, birthplace, which, is it Sinnoh? Is it somewhere else? Is it Kanto? I mean, Pokopia takes place in Kanto. Is its original birthplace Kanto? And, will this Bubbly Basin DLC kind of like tie into that? Very interesting. We'll last read Legend Arceus. Pokedex, rumored to migrate across the oceans, and visit Hisui's coastal waters only rarely. Although Manaphy resembles Fion, it is also quite different. The relation between the two is unclear, so that's really interesting too. Also, will Fion is Fion gonna have a cameo in this DLC? Fion is again an interesting Pokemon to me that's never really been fully explained. So yeah, Manaphy is essentially gonna be in this DLC, and it will have something to do with the Bubbly Basin. So that's super exciting, and yeah, can't wait for it. Anyways, guys, that was the breakdown of the Pokopia Bubbly Basin DLC trailer. I'll be doing more of these in the near future, kind of just talking about any more news and updates. If you guys enjoyed, definitely leave a like, comment down below, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.